I move on to another big story, and in keeping with the theme that we seem to have tonight, it's a topic often talked about, hotly debated, discussed, paper after paper, released. It's a topic that actually resonates across the world, across governments, United Nations, institutions come together to discuss climate change. Hardly anything actually happens on ground to tackle climate change. I want to tell you how disastrous this year has been. I want to simply give you 10 examples, just 10 examples of how climate change is slowly killing us, slowly destroying our world, our lives, our cities, our homes, our countries. And this is the story of how just in 2021, climate change-led disasters have impacted every single part of the world. And I want to read out that list to you before we talk about climate change. The floods in China, unprecedented floods that we saw this year. Heaviest rainfall in 1,000 years that we saw this year. 13 million affected, over 9,000 homes damaged. That's what climate change did to China. Floods in Germany, something you don't hear often. 200 people killed in heavy floods. Economic loss expected to run into billions because the cities were reduced to this. Heat wave in US and Canada. Intense heat wave, unprecedented temperature levels in June, July, hitting 50 degrees Celsius in parts of United States of America and Canada. Can you imagine that? Middle East, obviously one of the hotter parts of the world, seeing an unprecedented, hottest ever, hottest in a century kind of temperature levels. Oregon wildfires, another example. Bootleg fire that scorched more than 413,000 acres, destroyed hundreds of homes in the wildfire. Same for Canada. Latest one being Turkey and Greece. Wildfires because of overheating, because of excessive temperatures. That's what's been happening in the last 10 days, both in Turkey and in Greece. Closer to home in our own country, every year, state after state after state sees floods, disasters, landslides, deaths, destruction of homes, loss of farming field, loss of animals. And every year we talk about climate change, but nothing changes on ground. So tonight I want to talk about that. Why climate change pacts and agreements and speeches and discussions across the world largely get reduced to nothing more than a paper. Because institutions, corporates, governments, and even individuals don't see the changes that are required as economically viable. People don't want, and sometimes can't afford to, change to more climate-friendly habits because it's simply more expensive. Corporates don't want to change their systems, lower the emissions, to be implementing environment-friendly business strategies because it's a lot more expensive. It hits their bottom line. Governments won't do it because politics. Because why should this country do when the other country won't? Why should we be the ones who get hit when the other one doesn't? And so year after year, we lose hundreds and thousands of dollars because of these disasters. But we won't change anything on ground because in the short term, it doesn't sound economically viable. How do we change this? Let's have a conversation on that. And I say good evening to panelists joining us right now. Dr. Abhilash S., Director for Advanced Center for Atmospheric Radar Research. Abhinash Mohanty, Program Lead for Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Dr. M.J. Khan, Chairman for the Indian Chamber of Food and Agriculture. Leo Sultana, Coordinator of Environment Support Group, also joining us this evening. Let me actually start off with Abhinash Mohanty. Abhinash, often when I have these conversations with various people from different fields, the response is, oh, but why will we? Why should we make a car that's low on emissions when it will actually cost you 5 times more and require fuels that also cost you 5 times more? Why should I change even my toothbrush from plastic to bamboo or whichever other better alternative we have, which will cost me 5 times more? How do we change this from individuals to corporates and governments?
Right. Thank you, Tanvi, and good evening to all. First and foremost, what I'll say is until now, until today afternoon, when the IPCC report got released, we were exactly not been thinking of what are the here and now of climate change, which is peer reviewed, right? So for the first time in history, IPCC has highlighted that the climate change is real. While they have been doing it for a long time, but the human-induced climate change is for real. And that's where it needs a behavioral change, whether we switch to a more cleaner fuel in our vehicle or we change our toothbrush once we wake up, right? So this is for the first time we are seeing it. And the other impact story that the IPCC has highlighted this time is they have actually come up with a 2030 scenario. By 2030, if we breach, which is most likely that we are going to breach 1.5 degree limit, then what exactly will be the implications? And the implications will be in terms of extreme surge in flood events, cyclone events, and the drought events or the dry spells. But I will like to take you to some of these points of the optics. And the optics categorically suggests that in December 2020, we released a report and we did the hazard mapping of India, which states that 75% of the Indian districts are exactly hotspot for extreme events. That means 3 out of every 4 districts in India is a hotspot for cyclone, either for cyclone, flood, or drought. That's point number 1. And all of these changes have happened in a 0.6 degree rise so far. So clearly, something wrong is going in terms of, and climate change, as you rightly said, is not just a paper event. It needs to be scaled up, and the actions need to be scaled up both at subnational and district level, because at national level, we are quite like a thought leader. The recently formulation of the Coalition of Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, India's thought leadership across climate change and its commitment to its NDCs and stepping up actions, all of them have been very good. But what has happened is that disconnect lies at the subnational as well as at the national level. That is why some states outperform others. They have a very localized risk management, preparedness, and the quantum of loss and damage is also quite low. The loss of lives have also come down subsequently, but what IPCC suggests is that it's quite a rampant change that is going to witness. And we are actually witnessing that lived reality since 2020. We saw almost like more than a dozen of extreme events. 2021, we are just halfway mark. We are not even halfway mark, and we are just crossed it. And we saw almost 10 extreme cyclone events across the East Coast, West Coast, and a lot of impacts. Correct. So clearly, behavioral change needs to be put on.
Oh, yes, absolutely. The last time there was a cyclone that we were covering, this conversation came up. And of course, for experts, this is something that you already know. But as a layman, it just strikes us out of the blue that, wait a minute, how many of these cyclones have we actually seen along the Arabian Sea coast, which is not, usually you see it on the other side. And that's where it led us to, look into the matter and realize that we're not even prepared. Our tracking systems aren't prepared, our relief systems and relief teams aren't prepared, because this is something that we've only seen in the last few years. And that, I think, is problematic. Let me also bring in right now Abhilash on this. Dr. Abhilash, good evening to you.
Good evening.
There is a report that's come out from United Nations which calls climate change now code red for humanity. What do we read into this? What does that mean?
Actually, this after the formation of IPCC in 1980s onwards, the science part of this climate change and global warming was very much evident for the scientific community. The only problem was it was not accepted across the world. Now we came to a reality that we are living in a world that every citizen on the earth's surface is experiencing the hard part of it, the most devastating part of this climate change due to global warming. So that means almost all region on the Earth's surface, right from the South Pole to North Pole, east to west, everywhere on the Earth's surface is experiencing unexpected, unprecedented weather events. That is the main signal of the climate change that we have experienced for the last 2-3 decades continuously, and this year is also not an it is also an example for a typical example for the climate change and global warming, because we were experiencing a lot of flood events in Europe, China, and heat wave events even in Canada. So that is what this is very much evident. Maybe from 20-30 years before it was evident, but the only thing is that mostly the people are accepting this as a reality maybe over the last 5-6 years, because most of the citizens they are experiencing the extreme weather events in the form of climate change. So this is the reality. So that what it means to India or all other world countries is that it is not just limited to humankind. That is what I want to say. Because if you look at the history of the long history of the earth, we evidence there were 5 biggest mass extinction event has happened on the earth. So if you consider the last extinction event maybe around 60 million years back, if you look at in the climate analysis, we often look for the paleoclimate data where if there is any kind of climate analog happened in the past. So that means if you look at the 60 million years back, almost in the Paleocene, Eocene climate, there also we can find out that there was a thermal maxima happened in the Earth's surface that was almost like 10 to 15 degrees warmer climate than the usual or normal climate. So that time also what has experienced is that there were a lot of biggest, almost 85% of mass extinction event had happened, like dinosaurs or washed away from the Earth's surface, like major extinction event had happened. And if you look at another last 5 extinction event, it has got a climate footprint. If you look at the start from the maybe from the 450 million years of the Earth's history, Earth has witnessed almost like 5 mass extinction events. Almost all this extinction event had happened due to very big changes in the climate changes. The only difference between that changes and the changes what we are experiencing today is that the changes which had happened in the previous millions of years was over a long period of time, like lakhs of years or even millions of years. But what we are experiencing today is very rapid. As you rightly point out, what we had experienced over millions of years of time scale, that is what we are experiencing today, maybe in 10 years or 20 years. That is what it is happening right now. It will not withstand, because the future of Earth is under perish. If you look at the evolutionary history also, evolution by natural selection has been happened over the Earth's surface over a period of years and due to climate changes and all. But now what is happening is that the present rapid changes not even able to sustain lot of habitats in the Earth's surface. That is what not only the terrestrial ecosystem, the aquatic ecosystem is also under threat. That is means whatever we are emitting to the Earth's surface or the atmosphere, 93% of this heat is going to the ocean. So that means ocean is also warming. Ocean is act like a buffering system to our climate system. But if ocean is also warming at a higher rate, that is what is happening over the Arabian Sea. compared to other ocean basins, Arabian Sea is warming at a higher rate. If other ocean basins are warming at a rate of 0.7, 0.8 degrees Celsius over 100 years, the Arabian Sea witnessed almost like 1.2 degrees Celsius warming over 100 years. So this is what is happening. Arabian Sea is becoming a hot spot or hotbed for more and more severe cyclonic storms to form. Not only that, if you look at Arabian Sea, the ocean dead zone, like low oxygen zones are increasing, acidification is increasing in the Arabian Sea, the chloral bleaching is happening. Like that, it is affecting almost all kind of ecosystem in the ocean that is indirectly affecting the people, or especially the indigenous people lying on the land. That means the climate change more impacted to the indigenous people, because in the present IPCC report, one of the recommendation was to implement indigenous knowledge. So that indigenous knowledge has to be implemented everywhere. We often tell that ecosystem services and benefit of it, but we are not even appreciating the indigenous community and indigenous knowledge in our system. Because
you know what you're talking, and the suggestion that you're making, so important to be used and to be implemented, but unfortunately it doesn't even become part of the conversations that are happening in certain platforms, and between certain segment of people. They're not even thinking, they're not even close to integrating it or including various segments of people into this conversation. But Dr. M.J. Khan, we've had two experts who've actually set the context right in terms of how this climate change is now a reality, that more and more people will accept it is code red time for humanity, and what that means in terms of more heat waves, more cyclones, more floods, more disasters. Now, how do we go about stopping it, taking initiatives that need to be done at a country level, when the countries themselves, between themselves, will continue to point fingers and say, oh, but you need to do it more, or XYZ needs to show more before we actually do it, because we as a country cannot afford to take these steps?
Thank you very much. In fact, now the acceptance has happened, the action has to begin. The acceptance of the people and of the governments that climate change is real and is here to stay. And action has to begin at the level of the governments. There is need for intergovernmental cooperation, collective global action. There is a need for cooperation among the scientists at much greater level than what it has happened so far. There is a need of the cooperation of the public, because the lifestyle change, it has to move to more simpler lifestyle. The cooperation of the farmers is also required to reduce the release of methane gases, because animal husbandry is one key sector which is releasing huge methane gases, causing this kind of global warming. And also the crops like rice. So there is a need for change in the food habit also. There is a need for change in the lifestyle also. Now in agriculture, there is a real problem. Why? Because 1 degree rise in the temperature may lead to 20% reduction in the food production. However, some countries will gain by global rise in the temperature, those which are cold countries, but the countries like India will end up paying much more than what the average global cost to rise in the temperature will be. And therefore, there is a need for, at a much alarming pace, much rapid pace, the work has to begin. Now we have two institutions. One is the National Initiative for Climate Resilient Agriculture, which was funded by the World Bank, and now the government of India is supporting that. And there is a full-fledged institution at Hyderabad, National Institute of Climate Change in Agriculture. Inter-university coordination is required, and farmers' awareness at much higher level, because if the food production is affected, nothing else will work. The report already that has mentioned that the southern and western coast of the country will register much more rise in the water level, and therefore even the kind of frequency and the extremity that we witness will make even the fishing difficult. So it is not only the rise in the temperature, the real issue is that extreme situations are there. There's a more snowfall. There's a much higher level temperature rise. For example, this year in Canada, in Vancouver region, one city registered 50.5 degree temperature, unprecedented. Not even our Rajasthan registered that. Not even Arabian countries see that kind of. Saudi Arabia for last few years is witnessing the snowfall. That hailstorm. So that kind of situation. 2 years back, I was in Netherlands. There was a rise of 4.5 degree temperature one single day. So now the world is convinced that this problem is for real. Now the action for real has to start on a much serious note.
Okay,
Yes.
so effectively, Mr. Saldana, what we're saying is that we've spent now decades first trying to convince the world. And while IPCC, that represents over 180 countries, members of United Nations, may have come out with this report, which gives us the hope, or at least there is a larger acceptance of the fact that climate change is real, we're still so far away from actually implementing any initiatives. And the argument often is, well, it's not economically viable, where where poorer countries or developing countries and poor segments in poorer countries can't really afford to do this, so let's not even go there.
The problem really is when you look at these type of arguments is that we think that we can technically get out of it. And climate change is that kind of a situation where a lot of accountants and economists have basically kind of captured the space and try to edge numbers around and make us feel as if somehow technology will come and save us. Let me put it this way. It's quite simply impossible for technology to save us. What is required is a structural change in the way in which we access governance, how we manage our resources. And if I were to give an example of that, in the 80s, when I was working on the West Coast and early 90s, I could see the Arabian Sea about a kilometer or two out, the national highway, Coastal Highway 7. Today, the Coastal Highway 7 has been moved in because the sea has come in. Now, that's the kind of shift that you have seen all along the West Coast. So what it really means is that we don't have time. We are run out of time. 10 years or 20 years is nothing in terms of the type of cataclysmic events that are already playing out across the world. The fires that you see are happening in countries which have resources to get people out. So you don't see death rates. But just imagine if the Western Ghats, I just read one of the worst stories that I've read about climate change, worst reports that I've read, is that the Gulf Stream may switch off. It's the stream which actually brings the monsoon moisture to the South Asia region. And we have seen cataclysmic events like that 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, when the Harappan civilization, which is far more intelligent than us, and a civilizational process which knew how to harvest surface runoff and create dense populations and survive for 1,000 years without conflict, switched off, and they had to disperse because there was a 300-year lack of monsoon. So these cycles have happened before, and people have known to adapt to such, kind of turn off of the monsoon cycle. But today, if it happens, we are going to see conflict at a scale which is unprecedented in human history and on this planet. So really, if you're looking forward to what should we do in the next 5-10 years, we should actually look at what Mr. Narendra Modi as Prime Minister did when he first took on the role. He actually constituted TSR Subramanian Committee and gave them 3 months to go and water down and destroy the environmental jurisprudence of this country. What kind of Prime Minister gives a mandate to a committee, and the committee delivered within 3 months and said you can dilute almost all of the laws? We had 6 laws were listed.
Yeah.
And effectively they said, have the best faith in the corporate sector to deliver. Now we have seen in the last 7 years, corporate sector has been essentially taking advantage even of the pandemic.
Yes.
And that is the type of reality you should look at and compare this in contrast with what China is doing, what's happening in the geopolitical spectrum. So you cannot lean on governments and corporates to help us out of this. This is simply not going to happen. People must get out, change governments, ensure that the top 5% of the world's income earners actually stop earning that kind of money. It's filthy rich people. They even have money to go up for a 10-minute joyride nowadays in space.
Yeah.
That's the kind of money which should have gone across to Africa, to South Asia. So millions
or invested to come up with technology that helps you save the
See, I don't think technology
planet.
is going to save us here. It has to. We require structural.
You spend that money into researching alternatives that will help you replace plastic at a more economic cost. There's no point in us saying drop plastic, avoid plastic, ban plastic, when you don't provide people with the alternatives that they can use to that. Similarly,
we have to understand the seriousness of the problem, what the IPCC is saying.
Yes.
You cannot say by segregating plastic you can save the planet anymore. That is gone.
Exactly.
So what we need to think of is structural changes where we stop production of certain things, change the nature of our economy, and ensure that people have a chance, not corporates.
Exactly. And let me actually take it a step further and add more to this, Dr. M.J. Khan, because, every time we have a conversation about post a cyclone or post a flood, and especially when it comes to floods and landslides, irrespective of the political party, the governments turn around and say, oh, what can we do? There was a cloud burst. We couldn't have done anything. There was a landslide. The fact is that we are still not realizing it's all connected and dependent on our actions, including how it will impact the agriculture. If the rains are too late or too early, you completely lost that agriculture season.
In fact, all the three situations, one, excessive rains, the scanty rains, and the frequency of the rains. So this is one part of it, but this is not the end of the story. More serious approach on the policy changes is required, because if we have to make it the movement of the people and for people to cooperate, it has got to be a much more serious approach to the policy making, and also the cooperation of the corporates, where the green technologies will have to replace the fossil fuel based technologies, or where the use of such material that leads to more kind of challenges to the climate. So these issues have to be pursued in a way that the cooperation of the industry commensurates with the changes in the climate, and also the policies have to be aligned to that. But coming to the agriculture part of it, I think there is a real danger unless more climate resilient agriculture practices are followed by the farmers. And for that, the cooperation of all the universities, 79 or 80 that are there, and 104 or 105 institutes of national importance under ICR system are there. So all these institutional network or infrastructure have to be on board for any meaningful change in the agriculture system to happen at the farmers level. So unless the methane gases are controlled, unless the release of the methane from the cow dung or from the rice crop or from such similar sources is controlled significantly, and for that even the change in the food habit may be required. Because to consume the meat 3 to 4 times extra production of the crops is required to meet that challenge. So therefore these changes at the farmers level, at the consumer level, in fact, simpler lifestyle is very, very compliant to the what challenge we are facing today.
Okay, so those are some of the things that we can look at doing and will have to actually, not can look at, will have to look at doing if we want to even try and arrest the speed at which we are damaging the entire system. Abhinash, what are the few other things that we can get countries to actually implement? And again, I will come back to the economic aspect of it, because corporates won't change unless the cost really makes sense to them. Governments won't change unless the cost makes sense to them, and neither will the individuals. Abhinash Mohanty, the question to you.
Okay, thank you, Tanvi. We just got confused with
Yes,
Abhinash.
I know. That's why I realized that I must specify.
No worries. Okay, so in fact, what you raised and what I've been hearing to other fellow panelists is the time is quite high. And if we don't stop climate change, then it's going to impact us very seriously. I'll again put down some numbers into perspective. And the lived reality check is that heat waves or extreme heat waves are going to cost India more than 34 million jobs by 2030, right? And the Indian industries are going to lose almost 2% of their revenues if they don't mitigate and they don't have a industrial readiness kind of plan. So that's why you need to work it out quite high in terms of industries. And let me again reiterate that we just heard what Mr. Khan has highlighted in terms of agriculture productivity and how much of loss and damages that are going to affect. But again, if I'm an individual and I'm not adhering to a sustainable lifestyle, and climate change is going to impact me very hard, because 25% of my family budget is going to increase because of climate change, because of the temperature rise. And these are serious numbers, right?
Yeah.
And those serious numbers need to be retrospected, both at a family level, both at a community level that I say, and at a governance level. Now, a lot of scrapping has happened in terms of policies, in terms of actions, but what has not happened is we have not been able to translate the impacts. And that is why there has been a slow denial, or rather a very slow kind of acceptance to what climate change can do to all of us. Recently, after the pandemic, right? Pandemic hit us in 2020. And then along with pandemic, we were suffering extreme locust attack. We were suffering cyclones. We were suffering flooding. And all of these are the compounding impacts. And IPCC report also highlights the same thing in the calculation. So what has to be done is we actually need to retrospect, and everybody has got a number to play to contribute that mitigation level. And if we don't do it, then India is already the 5th most vulnerable country in the world, and we need to take it further. We need to pause our actions and make it more sustainable.
Yes. Okay, I am completely out of time. There's so much more. I think no amount of time that we devote to this topic will be enough. But hopefully we'll have lots more of these conversations now that there is wider acceptance of the fact that climate change is real and is actually at a code red level for us, and we need to act now. We need to act at a larger scale, and few tokenism kind of initiatives will actually not going to work. One needs to see what can be done, and tackling climate change can't just be about one entity. It can't just be the governments, it can't just be the corporates, and it can't just be a few handful of individuals. Collectively, we will have to acknowledge, accept this reality and work towards it. And let me tell you why. It's not just to say, and this is also a reality, but in case it doesn't matter to you and you want to ignore climate change, it's not just to say that in Antarctica the temperatures have gone up by to 18.3 degrees, which means 98% of emperor penguin colonies may be pushed to the brink of extinction. Now, for a lot of people, this by itself should be a big concern. But if it isn't to you, let me tell you this, that as temperatures rise and ice melts and sea levels rise, there will be more heat waves, there will be more landslides, there will be more floods, more cloudbursts. The sea will begin to come into the land. We will lose more and more of our available land, where at one point no land will be safe. No land will be safe from these climate changes. And then what will you do? Or what will your future generations do? Think about it, because only that thought perhaps will make you want to act now. Thank you for joining us.